Celebrating 100 years of educational excellence, Marysville teachers remember.
I graduated in 1970 from Western Michigan University. And of course, jobs were tight for teachers in that time. One reason was the Vietnam War, because there were so many boys particularly that were taking college deferments. They were going into college, they were taking classes just so they could stay out of that situation. And so there was a glut, not a super glut, not like in the 80s, but more, there was still a glut of teachers, plus baby boomers. When we were going through school, they were hanging kids from the chandeliers, 35, 40 kids in a classroom, because they just didn't have the space, number one, because all those GIs came back from World War II and had all these kids. And you'd go into school and they were just all over the place, the kids were. So it was not easy to get a job the first year, so I substitute taught in Marysville. I remember that I was so excited to go to Marysville because they paid the most money. And I made a sum total, I think, of $33 a day. So I was doing my subbing, and then Kathy Novelli had gotten pregnant, and she took a maternity leave, which is what ladies did back in those days. So she wasn't coming back, and they came in and they said, okay, we have a ninth grade position at the high school in English. I liked the administration, and Mr. Wilsey was a real gentleman to work for, is the best I could say. He never promised you something that he couldn't deliver on, which, was a real mark of character. And he said, okay, Lou, he said, if you want to come in, he said, we'd be glad to have you on staff, but it could be just a temporary position. So I came in and they gave me four classes of ninth grade English, and then I had the one class of refresher English. I ended up with that class last hour of the day. This refresher English course was a gathering of pirates, is the only thing I can put together on it. I had 33 kids in the class because there were that many who had failed either ninth grade or 10th grade. But it was a little bit chaotic, particularly for a first-year teacher who had visions of teaching Shakespeare. Of course, discipline being a big factor for any new teacher who's coming into the building, I was thrown in to the deep end of the pool. But I did have a couple girls who should have belonged to the Women's Wrestling Federation. I had one in particular who was about 6 foot tall and broad-shouldered, and she asked to go to the lavatory. Well, as a young teacher, and I'm saying, oh yes, they need their privacy, and all this. Okay, just sign out on the piece of paper here, and then you can go to the lavatory. Mr. Stevens, Darnell Stevens, came down to my room, and he knocked on the door, and he says, Mrs. Kiefer. I said, yes. He says, do you know where this student is? And I said, yes, she went to the lavatory. He said, no, she's not in the lavatory. He says, look out your window. And I walked over to the window, and Curly's Bakery was across the street. And she's got 3 girls that came from Port Huron High School, from what I understand later. And she's got 2 of them on the ground, and she's bouncing their heads alternately on the cement. And I'm going, oh, I'm going to get sued. It's going to be, I've lost my job for sure. I'd be lucky if I stay out of prison. So Mr. Stevens went out there with the assistant principal. But they broke it up, and of course the police got called, and I'm thinking, oh no, what a way to start out a year. And that kind of like gave me a good hint that I needed to get my discipline in order, and I needed to get it in fast. Mrs. Bellows, she was the queen of the school, and she was also queen of the English department. And she came in and sat down with me, and she said, Lou, she says, this is what you're going to have to do. And she gave me a whole, number one, never make a rule that you're not willing to enforce. A lot of people come and say, quit the talking or else you never do that. Always make a rule that you're willing to enforce. So don't make frivolous rules. And number 2, she says, never reprimand a kid in front of the other kids, which I thought was a real, they didn't teach that in college. I mean, I made it a point from then on, if I ever had an issue with a kid, I would never embarrass them in front of their peers. Emily Blackney was a counselor, and she was also our union rep, and she said, by contract, you're not permitted to have more than 30 in the class, and you've got 33. And they told me that they were going to be working it out. She said, don't you file a grievance. She says, you can't. You're too tentative. She says, but the association will file a grievance on your behalf. She says, it's not. And I went, well, I can do it. You know, you think you can save the world at that age. I can do it. I can take it. She says, Lou, it's not only not good for you to have that many kids in the classroom. It's chaotic, you know, when they're changing seats and all that. She says, it's not good for the kids. She said, you got to remember that. You're not being fair to the kids. The end of the year comes by, and I am notified. I get a pink slip. And I'm going, oh, you know, now what am I going to do and all this. And there was a position at the junior high that had opened up. Fred Vinald went to Mr. Wilsey and said, he said, you have a teacher on layoff that you laid off, and you can't go and hire back somebody who has let their certification lapse, and not until you hire back the people who've been on layoff. And again, I came under very tenuous circumstances to the junior high, and Rudy Lang was not really happy with that whole situation, who was my principal at that time. My resolve was, always be as happy as you were the day you found out that you got a job teaching. I mean, if you ever got blue, or if you ever got really grumpy or ugly, and you'd get frustrated, but you had to remember how happy you were at that point. And the day I couldn't remember that anymore would be the day that I would get out of it. I retired in 2006. It was the last year that I taught full-time. I had some health issues crop up, and the school system, it was kind of like The Godfather. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. You know, they had buyouts at that time. It was the whole break of a new life. You know, I started a new life, and it's been fun too.